Welcome back, everyone. We hope that you had a great lunch and are energized for the last panel of the Together Ensemble conference. This panel will explore how cutting-edge technologies such as AI, blockchain, and quantum computing can be harnessed to accelerate sustainable development outcomes, including the responsible deployment of these technologies, their potential to scale the impact of clean tech, and their role in achieving Agenda 2030.
We are delighted to have Alison, Herr, a program director at Evergreen, serve as the moderator for our panel. As the program director, Alison portfolios includes both national and local programs focusing on community resilience and civic commons. She also provides supports for the ongoing growth and development of Evergreen's program and impact evaluation strategies.
Alison has spent her career in the nonprofit sector, holding leadership roles within operations, partnerships, programs, and regional growth strategies for youth-focused development and educational work. She is adept in designing and implementing programs that drive impact, align with communities, and deliver value to partners.
Please join us in welcoming Alison and our panel to the stage.
You're out there. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch. The benefit of me not having heard that was I don't have to be embarrassed about what anybody said about me. So hi, everybody. The glare is a little bit more than I thought, so if you need my attention, please call out. So yes, my name's Alison Herr. Pronouns are she and her, and I'm a program director at Evergreen, which is a national nonprofit transforming public spaces for the health of people on our planet. One of the programs that I have the pleasure of working on is called the Community Solutions Network. We do this with the support of the Government of Canada and Infrastructure Canada, bringing data and tech solutions to small and medium-sized communities across Canada. So I am really, really pleased to be here today to talk about harnessing the power of EI and emerging technologies for eco-innovation. So I'd like to welcome out our panelists. So please join me on stage, everybody. I'll have you all introduce yourselves in a moment, but just very briefly, starting at the far end of the stage, we have Salman Qadir, who's an associate principal of the Sustainability Venture at BDC. We have Keegan Pinto, associate at Arctern Ventures, and we have Tyler Hamilton, senior director of clean technology at Mars. So panelists, please give a brief introduction of yourselves, your work, and what it is that connects you to this topic today.
Back to you.
All right, okay. Perfect, I'll start. As Alison mentioned, I'm with the BDC Sustainability Venture Fund. We are a $150 million early stage fund that looks to invest in Canadian companies, basically deploying technologies at scalable technologies that align with 6 of the UN SDGs. Our fund launched last year, and I can go into the UN SDGs that we're aligned with later on. But we look for companies that are deploying capital-light business models, so not hardware tech, but software-enabled or hardware-enabled that are software-led. That's it for me.
Okay, great, thanks.
Awesome. I'm Keegan. I'm an investor with Arctern Ventures. We're a Series A, Series B climate generalist fund, and so what we mean by that is that we will invest in any company that's commercializing technology to help fight climate change. For us, that means reducing our carbon emissions globally. We have an office in Toronto. That's where our headquarters is, but we also have one in San Francisco and one in Oslo in Norway. And so we will invest anywhere in the world in companies that are commercializing promising solutions.
Thank you.
Great. I'm Tyler Hamilton. So, as mentioned, I'm senior director of climate at Mars. I used to be clean tech, but it all blends together. So I oversee all climate programming at Mars. Mars is a innovation hub based in Toronto. I'm sure many of you have heard of it. Full name's kind of Mars Discovery District. The Mars is an awkward name for an organization that you work with, because when you call people, it's like, I'm Tyler from Mars. So I have to go into the whole explanation of what that stands for, medical and related sciences, but we're not just focused on medical sciences anymore, because I cover climate and it just gets complicated. But as an innovation hub, we're more than just an accelerator. We have accelerator programs, but we're a general support platform for early stage innovative startups across Canada. Majority of the companies we work with, I'd say, are in Ontario, but we are national. We work with about 1,200 plus companies across Canada, and within the clean tech or climate tech category, it's about 240. And we take a very broad definition of clean tech. It could be everything from transportation to advanced materials to ag tech to energy technologies, et cetera. So we do get to see a big variety, and it's a mix of hardware and software. We also run a bunch of climate programs that are focusing on, we put a lot of money into the R&D and building up companies in Canada, but we don't put as much emphasis on, okay, they've commercialized. How do we get these things to scale in the marketplace? We don't focus on the adoption. And what I say a lot is innovation without adoption is a dead end. So we have climate programs that are really focused on trying to tackle those barriers to adoption in the marketplace that are holding back the growth of the ventures that we support.
Okay, awesome, thank you. So I want to say thank you to Grayson for earlier today for giving me a name for what I now realize is my inner monologue, the grandmother voice, because I'm always asking, but why? Why are we doing this? And I think it's safe to say, based on what we've heard already today from our previous speakers, that this intersection of AI and emerging technologies and clean tech and innovation, there are opportunities here for accelerating progress with the SDGs. So that's the why. Let's talk about some of the opportunities. Can you each please take a turn sharing some of the most promising applications of AI or other emerging technologies that you're seeing in connection with eco-innovation? And maybe let's start down with Salman.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the two of the 6 SDGs that we focus on are affordable and clean energy, and then also smart cities, smart communities. And one of the key things that AI, as a consequence, has done is put a huge strain on the need for electricity. And so what we're seeing is, what you've seen in the current sort of state of electricity generation is that you've had all these nuclear plants, you've had all this centralized generation happening, and then powering that to centralized locations like the cities and municipalities. What we're moving towards is sort of like a virtual power plant moving forward, where everyone can generate electricity where they need to. There's solar farms in places where people just don't live. There's wind power being generated where people just don't live. And so you're seeing a lot of AI being used to how to manage that onboarding of clean energy to the grid, and then offboarding the dirty energy off the grid while still providing that resource to the consumers. And then on top of that, you're seeing on a decentralized basis, folks trying to generate power on their own, being off the grid a little bit more, and then having battery storage or other ways to store the energy, whether it's through local batteries at your house, in your businesses, in your cars eventually. And how does that manage and how does that work in terms of where everyone in that whole system plays, including utilities, including the people that generate those electricity itself. There's a lot of policy push as well in terms of regulations moving towards electrifying fleets. There's also policy towards, just on your energy savings at home, electrifying everything that you use. And so there's going to be a lot of work being done around, and as Ajay talked about earlier in the earlier presentation, about predictive analysis when it comes to how do you know when to use your solar panels, how do you know when to put that in battery, how do you optimize that, whether it's for lower cost or whether it's for, hey, I just want green energy, optimize for that. And AI will help us do that, versus someone just sitting there flicking that breaker on and off. And so I think that's some of the stuff that we're looking at least I'm looking at personally, to see where that sort of transforms. And it's the whole supply chain. I think it's not just the generation, it's not just the usage, but it's also just the transmission lines in between, right? No one's talking about the operations and maintenance, and that's typically something that gets sidelined out of budgets, out of anything that people are working on. And so we have to be able to find ways to move all that clean energy onto the grid, right? If you look at the US, for example, there's a lot of energy sitting there, projects that need to be onboarded, and they're just not, because the capacity on those grids are just not there. So we need infrastructure to build that so that we can have these tools at our resources, at our disposal, to then figure out how to move the electricity from a wind farm in northern Ontario to somewhere else as we need to. So that's some of the exciting stuff that we're looking at with AI, at least, that's going to help increase that usage in the market.
Okay, nice. You mentioned the strain on electricity, and we will have time to delve more into that and other risks in the next question. Keegan, over to you.
Yeah, I'll give you a bit of a cheater answer to start with, and it kind of relates to what you're saying. But I think one of the things that's most exciting really is kind of the ubiquity that we're seeing with AI. We're seeing it everywhere, in almost every deal, every company that we're looking at. We've made 8 investments out of our third fund. AI is core to the business models of 6 of those 8 companies. And it's been everything from using ultrasound and AI to find defects in battery cells while they're on the actual assembly line still, to using computer vision and AI to help reduce food waste, sometimes by as much as 50% in commercial kitchens, all the way through to using consumer purchasing behavior to route used clothing so that it has the highest likelihood of avoiding ending up in landfill. So what's most exciting, I think, to me is just like how prevalent it is and how it's spreading kind of like across the value chain. You mentioned it's everywhere kind of throughout the supply chain. That spreads across all sectors. What I think is most interesting from an impact perspective are sort of these like large models where we're taking massive kind of like unconscionable amounts of data and solving problems in record time that we wouldn't necessarily be able to without AI. One of the most kind of like compelling and new applications of AI is in fusion, actually, and we're trying to figure out how to develop models to simulate the behavior of plasma during fusion reactions, which is just not something that we can do very efficiently without the use of AI.
No, I wouldn't think so. Okay, fantastic, thanks. Tyler.
Yeah, on the fusion thing, General Fusion, a company based in Burnaby, BC, has been using AI for quite some time now, actually, to do that, running millions of scenarios that no human could possibly run over our lifetime, to dismiss like 98% of them so that their staff can focus on the 2% that are within reach of the targets they're trying to reach. So that's, it's an example of the type of time that they're saving. Jumping on what Salman was mentioning about the electricity system, and I think you mentioned the load aspect, but focus more on the generation. I think it's just as compelling on the load. So you've got the solar panels and wind and other sources of generation. Energy storage kind of has that dual role of being a load and also generating electricity. But think of all the things that are in our homes and buildings. You've got increasingly heat pumps, you've got electric vehicles plugging in, you've got your water heaters, and a lot of those things tend to be big loads that use a lot of electricity, and a lot of them can operate in ways that don't have to be on all the time. They cycle on and off. So AI can be used to bring together, say, 5,000 households who each have all of these different appliances, and really understand the patterns of use, and to make sure that these things aren't all cycling on at the same time, but are being organized in a way where it's a consistent draw on the electricity system, so it's not overloading the system, but at the same time it's meeting the requirements of the homeowner or the building owner in terms of, when I wake up, will my car be charged at night, and is my home comfortable enough based on the settings that I have? So that to me is like, we talk about virtual power plants, and we tend to think about it as, aggregating lots of decentralized generation, but it's also kind of, I don't know what you'd call them. They're like virtual not power plants. It's more like aggregating lots of different loads that you're turning on and off to be able to help balance the grid. So that's one area that I'm super excited about, and I think there's huge potential. And we often hear that this drive for electrification is going to be hard to keep up on infrastructure. And it's true, we're not going to be able to build this stuff to accept all the cars and heat pumps and things going on. So we're going to need, like, AI is going to be essential to be able to make our use of electricity as efficient as possible, so it buys us time to let the grid infrastructure catch up. The other thing that I wanted to mention is around, like, AI is being used a lot. And it's not necessarily having a direct impact on things like emission reductions, but it's helping us to better understand the impact of climate and how to adapt to it and how to be responsive to it and build resilience into our infrastructure. Just like a wild example of a project that I recently heard about is there's a group in BC that's trying to leverage AI to predict lightning strikes so that they can anticipate where there's likely to be a forest fire starting and then have a response team in the area set up to be able to put it out before it spreads beyond control. So these are the kinds of things that people are thinking about and trying to use it for. I will say, though, that out of the companies that you look at, and you mentioned you invested in a certain amount, there's a lot that just kind of throw AI in their name or on their website to make it seem like, hey, but there's not really leveraging AI. So there's a huge spectrum in terms of how much machine learning and AI and different types of AI are being used within the core technology product that they're offering to the marketplace.
Yeah. And in fact, when we were speaking last week in preparation for today, that came up. And so I'm wondering how each of you approaches that selection. You know, how do you parse out the ones that are coming forward with truly innovative solutions from the ones that are just tacking AI or another technology name on an existing project?
I can start with that. I think at the core of it is that when we look at companies, we want to know just the problem they're trying to solve, right? At the end of the day, AI just gives you that productivity gain. And that's awesome, that's cool. But if you weren't using AI before January 2022 or 2023 when it came out, it's only been a year, there's no reason for you to have it in your name and on your splash page today. And so we really want to understand the problem you're trying to solve. And if AI helps you do that better and faster, that's great. But it's not like a checkbox that we look at to say, okay, well, you're using AI, yeah, let's get you funded because that's the next hype cycle. To Tyler's earlier point, at the end of the day, it goes down to the core. So we've had companies pitch and say, hey, listen, we're using Gen AI to do all this stuff. I'm like, well, isn't that just linear regression? Like, why do you need to use all this consumption of energy at the end of the day? We don't even need to quantify that. We just know it's different. It's a mad 99% cheaper to just use simple models that already existed 10 years ago. So why are you making this more complicated? And then you get to ask more detailed questions like, is your data structured data? Is it unstructured data? How do you label them? Do you have a triage before the data gets labeled? It goes into a little more technical in that. But at the end of the day, there are companies out there that are just taking enterprise data and saying, here, we'll make it more structured so that you can use a lower powered model that you don't need Gen AI to do the work that you want to do. So I think at the end of the day, just going back to the problem you're trying to solve, AI is a tool that will make you get to market, get your solution out there, get your answers faster. So instead of taking a week, it might take you a day. And that's really what the gain is. But at the end of the day, someone has to pay for you to solve that problem. And that's the investor's perspective, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I tend to agree that there are some problems that are 100% climate problems that AI isn't necessarily fit to solve. If you're kind of like picks and shovels in the ground building, a manufacturing plant to produce electric trucks, you may not necessarily need to use AI in your business. So when we look at businesses and they're claiming that they have some kind of like AI-enabled model, it's obviously not enough that they have a corporate like ChatGPT subscription and they've given access to all of their developers, right? Luckily, we invest at the Series A stage, so at this point, it's not kind of like an idea on paper. It is something real. There is a product. It is being commercialized, and so we can actually see it working, and we can see it kind of like change over time. And oftentimes, we will ask for kind of like historical outputs so that we can see the improvement track over time as the data has become more rich and as the algorithm has actually learned over the outputs, right or wrong, that it's created over that time.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, so we accept all sorts of companies that fall under that broad banner of clean tech. So it's not like I screen on whether they have AI or not. It's just whether they're a good company and they're going to have impact. But I would agree that I think a lot of AI companies or companies that kind of position themselves as having AI in their solutions, they're really delivering incremental benefits to the environment or the climate. Personally, and I think I could say for the most part, Mars is trying to have more meaningful impact, more disruptive impact. It's not to say that we won't work with those companies, but we also don't want to exaggerate their impact. Like AI can help us to better understand climate change. It can better help us collect or make sense of the data, fill gaps in our knowledge. It can help us get more efficient so that we're preparing for a future where we have to be more thrifty with energy. But it doesn't reduce emissions itself. It's just software, right? It's really that, picks and shovels, the hardware. That's where the big disruptions. It's the fusion. It's actually the fusion generator, not the AI that helps us get to fusion. But it does help us get to fusion faster, so that's why it's important.
Okay, great. So let's go a little bit more into ethics, responsibility of deployment of clean tech and AI. So earlier this morning we heard some great advice on ethical considerations for procuring and designing generative AI models. That's one example of the types of things that we could be delving into. What are some other examples of unintended consequences or risks associated with adopting innovative technology for eco-innovation that you're coming across? And if you'd like to add on some key principles or recommendations for mitigating risk, that would be wonderful.
Oh, not the tough question again. Okay.
We can go the other way if you
I'm happy to start. I have views on this. One of the things, and it's more like something that I haven't seen an answer for, is I haven't seen a solid analysis on the benefits that AI brings in terms of sustainability of the environment, climate, and the negative aspects. Because think about it, we tend to focus on all the great benefits that AI can bring, and we embellish it in many cases. But it's a huge consumer of electricity, and this is what scares me actually, right? Because Microsoft and Amazon are happy because their business is booming and they can't keep up with how many data centers they're building. But this stuff consumes tremendous amount of electricity, and all I see is society struggling just to keep up with clean electricity infrastructure and generation, just to get us off of the existing stuff, coal and natural gas, other fossil fuels that are being used, right? So AI is an additive thing that came out of nowhere that's adding a significant amount of electricity demand globally, and it's just making it harder and harder for us to catch up. So the question we have to ask is it actually providing benefits that outweigh that negative aspect of the electricity draw that it's putting on the system? Because it does create a strain. So that is really my biggest concern with AI, and there are some solutions that help us get around that. But the only other thing I would say, and I don't have an actual example to give you on how it affects clean tech or climate, but I am concerned about the bias aspects, right? It's only as good as the data that you enter, and AI can come to its own conclusions, and we need a lot of checks and balances to make sure it's not biasing certain people in society, either for or against. And I'll be clear right now, I'm not an engineer or a computer scientist, and I have a very superficial knowledge of AI, but I do know how it can apply in various markets and circumstances, and from what I read out there in the literature, the biases that it introduces into the system are a serious concern.
Totally agree on the environmental impact, and it's probably where we spend most of our time, just given the nature of the fund in terms of adverse impacts of AI. But as much as it's a question, certainly a massive problem. You brought up Microsoft. I think their emissions are up 30%, and they've made a net zero commitment for 24/7 clean energy matching for their data centers by 2030. And data centers today, I think, are about 1% to 2% of global emissions, which is comparable to passenger airlines, and it's supposed to grow to something like 7% by 2030, which is almost as much as cement, and that's kind of like one of the key industries that we need to decarbonize if we have a hope of fighting climate change. So a massive, massive problem.
And water, too. Right?
And 100% fresh water use. But from this seed, I mean, it also presents a pretty massive opportunity as well, right? Because again, Microsoft is a company that's made commitments to be net zero, and so they need, if they're going to serve their customers, and they clearly want to, they're going to need solutions as well in order to meet the commitments that they've made. And all indications are that they actually are one of the businesses that genuinely is going to and is making strides and investing real money in doing exactly that. And so there are a lot of potential opportunities for us to invest in companies that are going to help upstream players decarbonize their data centers. And it could be anything from kind of like straightforward, we talked about energy procurement, right? It could be energy procurement software. It could be actual hard solutions like how do we cool computer chips more effectively. The 2017, I think the top of the line like NVIDIA GPU consumed something like 150 to 300 watts of power at its peak performance, depending on the application. The current H100, I think, is like 700 watts, and I think it's the B100 they're releasing later this year is supposed to be over a kilowatt. So we're seeing this massive increase in power, which is a problem in and of itself. And with that, though, comes a massive increase in the heat that's generated, and it takes a lot of energy to cool these chips. And so there's a massive opportunity, for example, in data center cooling, to cool these chips more effectively so that we can reduce the power usage and still maintain that performance and serve customers.
Yeah.
I think just on that same thread, there's a stat out there that talks about, since the internet and everything else, that data centers have grown exponentially. Even before AI, electricity usage has been flat, right, across those data centers. And the reason is that they've found efficiencies within that. And that's not to say that the problem is solved by innovation. That's more political than anything else. But they will find efficiencies within them. And just going to the procurement side, I think the hyperscalers like Microsoft, Meta, Google, Amazon, they're spending, there's numbers out there, spending hundreds of billions of dollars every year just procuring chips from NVIDIA and the likes. But they're spending 2 to 3 times more on top of that for infrastructure, on top of that for energy costs, but also procurement. So they're building, their strategy seems to be that they're going to build solar farms, wind farms, or at least build the data centers with those so that they're using clean energy to supply their data centers.
That's where I have a problem, though, because those wind farms and those solar things could be going towards getting us off of coal. So it's not getting us any further. It's preventing the growth. It's neutralizing the growth. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes back to the earlier point about investing in infrastructure, because there's a lot of projects just sitting out there waiting to be onboarded to the grid. And it gives these guys opportunity. Hey, you already built it. We'll just build a data center around it and start making you money now, right? And so there's a lack of policy around building those infrastructure needs to bring those on board those projects, because the money's already been spent to build all that, and it's just not going anywhere, just sitting there idle. The other part is in terms of, like to Keegan, what he was saying about efficiencies within the data centers, right? We have a company in our portfolio that just does that. They're moving towards optical usage, optical fiber cable usage, and so they're getting to a point where that's much more efficient on energy usage within the data centers. And I think the one thing that we seem to forget is it really different this time? Because at the end of the day, if NVIDIA or someone else comes out and says, hey, we're more efficient in our chips, does that mean that Microsoft will buy less? Does it mean that they'll use less? No, they'll just install more. They'll build more data centers because they're on that trend to build these large language models and train them and own that sort of IP, as you've seen in the earlier talk from my jail about the models needing more and more resources, right? They're going to continue to build. That's really it. And so what we can only do is force the efficiencies on the different parts of the data center, to Keegan's earlier point. I think the other part is, as a consequence, is that with AI, you're looking at the people that, it is a disruptive technology, But at the end of the day, if you're the one being disrupted, it doesn't really feel that good, right? So it's, when it was the banking sector, who are the unbanked individuals, right? In here, who is it going to impact? We talked about AI helping and co-piloting these jobs going forward. It's the minimum wage jobs. It's the ones that are the CSRs when you call in. It's those ones where you can really use AI to help have that increase in productivity. But the consequence is that there is no more minimum wage jobs. For students that are growing up, my kids that might grow up want their first summer job, where's it going to be? It's not going to be at a McDonald's. It's not going to be at throwing newspapers, right? That's already gone out the door. So what is their first job to get that real life experience? And so we don't live in a different world where AI does take away that productivity, but it leaves the question as to what happens to the people that's actually disrupting at the lower stage.
I want to ask whose responsibility it is to look out for these risks and protect against them. It's incredibly complex, and I know one of the other questions that we talked about last week was about an innovation ecosystem. So is the solution found in collaboration, cooperation, some sort of consortium? What are your thoughts on how to approach these risks?
So I'll just say one thing as an anecdote, right? I said a few stats, Keegan's throwing a few stats out, and everyone might take that as gospel and may not verify that, right? Or may verify that. But before AI, you used to go to your older brother or your older cousin and whatnot, ask them for advice on how to do things, and they would teach you one way, and you'd take that as gospel and do it the wrong way for 10 years, right? But that's exactly what AI is. It gives you that answer, but that doesn't mean that you take it as gospel and run with it, right? I think it's the UI and the UX and everything else that goes with it. But we have to have that self-responsibility at the end of the day to know that, hey, this is the output, but I should still verify. I should still look at what does it actually make sense, right? And I think that's the critical thinking part that we sort of tend to forget to do or even to learn going forward. I have 2 young kids, and it goes back to are they learning just to learn, or are they learning to criticize and understand what's going on around them in the world that I have no idea what's going to look like, right? All I know is that they have to be able to look at the answer and say it's right or wrong.
Do you think the information exists for people to be able to make intelligent decisions if they're choosing between 2 technologies, for example?
I think it goes back to Tyler's earlier example about general fusion, right? You have 100 different scenarios. At least help me narrow it down to something that works, right? Or at least give me a confidence level that, this is the accurate information. It goes back to explainability of AI, like can you actually source back? And it can't. It can tell you, hey, by the way, I got this extra sentence from this PDF, but it won't tell you exactly what words it used to rewrite that. It'll just say, I figured it out based on that. And that's still the limitation, and we have to live with that. I think it's just awareness of what the limitations are. AI has been around before. It's just the chat sort of interface sort of made it very widespread and used, and that sort of gave us an in to using it. It was always there. Netflix made shows about it. House of Cards was made based on how you watched their Netflix shows, right? The whole show was scripted based on that. Mm-hmm. The female president, everything, like all that was based on just data, right? It was already there. Now we just have it in our fingertips, and that's a little different.
Yeah, okay, great. Keegan.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great answer. From the investor seat and kind of like thinking about the companies that we invest in and how they're going to use AI, you mentioned that we don't actually know how the world's going to look, right? And I think that's part of one of the key truths that we need to kind of like accept, internalize, and understand and kind of like reckon with. Like we're on the frontier. And so there's an unavoidable truth that all of us have some responsibility. Mm-hmm. So it's the operators certainly and the developers of the technology. It's the users of the technology. It's us as investors in that technology. We need to understand what we're actually investing in and what the potential knock-on effects could be. And ultimately, there's a regulatory role to play as well. And regulation will lag, and it is, and we're not even necessarily doing the best job at regulating technology even before AI. But that role needs to be there. And ultimately, at maturation, I think that's going to be kind of like the guiding light in the standard setting. But until that point, and it'll be decades until we really get there, it really falls in part on everybody. And so just as an example, like something that you could ask as an investor would be like, okay, if you are running an AI model as part of your business, like what provider are you using? Where are you sourcing your compute? Is it from, you know, a 24/7 energy matched data center that you're, you know, pulling some compute from Microsoft or from AWS, or is it from a data center in a part of the world where they're running it on coal? And what does that mean for you and your business? Is it still going to be economical if you switch over? And asking those kinds of questions. And there are a lot of questions that you just don't know to ask yet. There are unknown unknowns, and that's just a reality. Yeah. But you have to do the best you can to do your due diligence and ask the questions that you know to ask.
Great, thanks.
So we have a program at Mars called Tech Stewardship, and it's designed to help people answer these questions, but more through kind of a peer facilitated peer format. Because I think there's a lot of people in organizations that are working with AI that have these questions, and they have these individual kind of ethical dilemmas that they struggle with internally, right? And so the idea of tech stewardship is to bring people together, and it's almost like therapy, therapy sessions, so people can just raise their concerns and then speak to others who are struggling with the same thing and try to come to common solutions. But that, again, like it falls onto what Keegan was saying, it's really all of our responsibility. I also want to just make sure, like we've been zeroing in on AI, and this is AI and emerging technology. I don't want to throw AI under the bus. Like, to me, I think like blockchain and Bitcoin and all this cryptocurrency stuff is a load of crap. Like, I don't understand it, and it's a huge consumer of electricity. But taking a lesson from that industry, or that I don't know what you call it. There have been innovations there. So like Ethereum basically changed its whole model so that it could reduce the energy consumption of its cryptocurrency. I think it was 99% or something. So there is examples of like groups out there trying to take responsibility, and with that competition, it forces others to try to get there as well, so that they stay competitive in the market. And that also creates other opportunities for other entrepreneurs who see these problems and try to solve them. You know, there's a company in Cambridge here that we've been working with for a long time, and they use advanced materials to build a heat engine that works as ideal for a new type of data centers that are increasingly cooled with liquid cooling. And they just run the hot liquid through their machine, and it gets extracted, and it creates electricity, and then just feeds it back into the data center to offset the electricity use. So there's lots of great solutions out there, and actually that advanced material, it's an example of an advanced material where AI can help towards the accelerated discovery of those kinds of advanced materials that can do that kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay, thank you all. Great answer so far. So in all of the earlier talks so far, I've noticed that there have been a lot of questions, a lot of audience engagement. I think I'd like to allocate a little bit of extra time. I'm going off book here. But can I just do a check if there are audience questions at this point? Yep, there are a few. Can we get some mics over here, please? And then if you all run out, I'll ask more.
Hi. So about the use of AI responsibly, you guys mentioned a lot about Microsoft. So up until recently, I was very proud of what all the actions that Microsoft was taking in terms of, you know, going carbon neutral. But what I recently discovered is on LinkedIn, there was a post by a Microsoft employee stating how they're using AI and ML to pump oil faster. So would love to know what your thoughts are on that.
That's a great point. Like I wanted to raise that earlier, so I'm glad you raised it. AI can be used by existing industry to perpetuate their old models, right, and just make them more productive. And that's a great example of how the oil and gas industry today is using AI just to get more efficient, to find where oil wasn't found before. So it's actually, it creates that kind of counterbalance that we have to be careful about.
Hi, with the climate crisis, we talk a lot about a just transition, and then there's been a lot of work engaging communities, civil society in this building political will for a just transition. And as I think about this ecosystem like we're talking about, it seems like there's a very important role at the governance level related to federal, provincial, different levels of government related to regulation. And I'm wondering if you know who is doing this work, or if there are gaps you see in building an educated, engaged public, engaging citizens in this work towards a just AI transition.
Well, AI is not like my focus, so I can't speak to that. I do know there's entire organizations that exist to tackle this issue. They're not government, but I think they're doing a lot of the research that will be used to make recommendations for government to create these kinds of bodies. It's still, as Keegan said, it's still the frontier. It's the Wild West. So a lot of these structures haven't been set up.
Yeah, there's some kind of like leveraging of sort of existing organizations. I think we have like a pan-Canadian AI strategy. Is that right? And so they're leveraging work from it's like the Standard Society of Canada or something, SSC, I think. And so that's where it's starting, at least here. To your point, not my kind of like focal point, so I can't speak to opportunities to get engaged specifically. But you can definitely see the beginnings of it start to take shape, which is encouraging.
Okay, we have several questions from Slido, so I'm gonna ask some of them. So the first one is, how can AI be used to reduce societal inequities, increase collective empathy, and scale up altruism? And how can it use to empower, or at least not disempower, grassroots innovators or entrepreneurs that initiate radical systems change?
Great question.
I think you have the wrong panelists on stage to answer. You know, I can only speak to the technology and innovation side of things. But the last part of that question, though, could you repeat that? It was about how to enable innovators, like small.
Yeah, how to use the AI to empower, or at least not disempower, the grassroots innovators or entrepreneurs that initiate radical systems change.
Yeah, I can't answer that.
I mean, I think there's one aspect of the answer that I think is that AI it's not the goal. It's not necessarily the role of and I'm going to anchor on climate because that's where I spend my time professionally. An innovator isn't necessarily innovating, AI specifically. There's a solution that is being focused on, and AI is used to enhance that solution. So AI is really just a tool. It's a little bit pedantic to think about it this way right now, but eventually needs to be almost thought of as like a suite of Microsoft Office apps. Like it's something that you use to enhance something that you're already doing. And so it shouldn't necessarily, in that lens, inhibit innovators at any point along kind of like the curve at the grassroots level, or innovation happening kind of like within an enterprise. And then in terms of like scaling impact from this seat, it's successful businesses, if they are having a positive impact, will, as they scale, naturally scale positive impact. And so if I'll pick a simple example, like if you are able to create carbon neutral cement, right? And you have now 1 ton of carbon neutral cement versus 1 ton of kind of incumbent cement. As that business scales and you go from 1 ton of cement to 100 tons to 1,000 tons to more, your impact will naturally scale. And so if you've used AI to help you come up with the formulation or continue to come up with the inputs that you can put into that cement, your impact will scale simply as your business does.
And I think addition, I don't know if it actually answers it, but if we think about how it's being used to support new innovations, if we take a bit like that, the affordability issue for housing, affordable housing, like it's being used today to develop new processes and methods for building houses, robotics, factory-built houses that get shipped on site much more efficiently, using less materials and less waste. We're turning a lot to things like AI to help get us there faster. It's again still early days, but more and more people are starting to think about how we leverage that.
I think one thing I'll add is there are companies that have a lot of data, and so like I'll talk about, like we have a company that does that basically allows you to access geospatial and Earth observation data, right? So for grassroots organizations that are looking to solidify on climate action and stuff like that, they can use these tools to show the impact of climate change happening throughout. So you can use tools to build on these platforms to get that Earth observation data, get that geospatial data, get that other sensor data that's already available out there in a more democratized way. Because it's all there. It's just a matter of knowing that it's available and how you can use that to basically push out your, lack of a better word, agenda going forward and what you want to tell the world a little bit better with more data, more stories, right? That's what everyone else is using it for. I don't think it stops anyone else that doesn't see or have access to that to use it as well. So the stuff is out there. There's tools being built to provide better access to those, to do better analysis, to do better predictions, right? And so you can use those same tools to move forward the narrative that we need more funding for X, Y, Z. Right.
Can I just jump in? Okay. So I know that we've been talking around the idea of ethics in AI development, and I know as well we're sort of referring to AI as a tool and not a solution, but the thing that kind of keeps jumping around in my head as I'm thinking about this is the references to AI as a tool for efficiency, a tool for increased productivity, but then also I know that Salman, you touched on this as well about the risks of who are going to lose the jobs and who are the people who are going to be affected, and I wonder if there have been any conversations in the spheres of your Wild West that are maybe about boundaries or limits of where do we stop? What makes sense? Like, because in my mind as well, thinking of productivity as reframing it to be about people, and there is productivity in things that are maybe non-conventional or not numerical, things like human well-being as a whole, and things that may not be as measurable or considered in sort of a coding or like a more technical kind of solution. And so yeah, have there been conversations around limits and sort of safeguards, or is that kind of, are we maybe not there yet, or?
I think that's a really good question. Personally, I have, and just speaking from kind of like the experience that we've had kind of like investing in climate technologies generally, we haven't come across a case specifically where AI, a company that's using AI has also threatened existing jobs. We have come across cases where a company's innovating and it's not using AI, but it is threatening jobs, and we have had those exact conversations, and in those situations we've decided not to invest. That's a decision that we've made. It's not necessarily something that we've like codified into a structure at the company, and it's also not necessarily a conversation that every single investor in Canada or in North America or around the world is going to be having. So I think it's a really good question to ask, and it's not something that we have codified. I can speak from experience that those conversations happen, but it's, I think, important to kind of like keep top of mind and try to report on, I think, as much as possible as we come out with like new frameworks. One of the big ones in our world is about climate impact and how the actual kind of like hard numbers behind what your investments are doing from a climate perspective, carbon specifically. And I don't think it's a stretch to assume that as that reporting becomes more standardized and becomes built out, you're going to see other metrics, some of which being social well-being, being pushed into that reporting framework as well. And it's going the direction of just like how businesses are required to report kind of like financial results. They also need to report ESG results. I don't think it's a stretch to think that one day those types of metrics will be included.
Yeah, I think just to build on that as well, what I was going to go back to is, before, like if you just look at history, how it repeats itself, sort of like we used to, basically if you wanted to do agriculture, we used to plow, and then we started using animals and oxes to help us get that more efficient. And then with the Industrial Revolution and everything else that happened after that, it just increased prosperity. Like we had economic growth, we had everything else. Everyone was better off, but the income inequality sort of changed, right? There were people that were, the gap was getting wider and wider. And then with computers and IT and internet, we were able to now do more with less, right? AI is the same way. So the intent is hopefully that it will reverse that. But at the end of the day, we measure prosperity still to this day with GDP or national gross product, whatever it is. We don't include happiness, for example. I mean, if we're going towards this AI is going to replace all our jobs, are we happy in the end, right? Is that how we're going to measure the impact? I don't know. It's a very qualitative measure, and that goes back to social well-being that Keegan's talking about. And so I think when it comes to job displacement, I mean, it's already happened in the past. There's this stuff that one of my professors used to put up on a slide all the time was, there was someone that would go around and they were the alarm clock, right? They would go around and they would wake you up every morning at whatever time you wanted to. And then we created the alarm clock. And so those jobs were displaced. It's a very simplistic example. But with AI, what's tending to happen is we're seeing this fear that the scale of it and the growth of it is very exponential. More than a hockey stick. It's just almost like a cliff. And so we're scared about the job displacement that's going to happen. And that's the one metric that government and anyone else can only measure and quantify, really, right, is job displacement. If we add regulations, if we add anything else to it, all we're doing is slowing that down so that's more, so that we can take it in a little bit better, feel good about ourselves. But we don't get to that end point anyways. It may not take 3 years, it will take 10, 15 years, right? But we'll get to that point. So that it goes back to policy and everything else as to how do we manage that job displacement that might happen, if at all it does happen. And that goes back to reskilling, right? You go to a point where, like I have young kids, they don't need to learn to drive by the time they're older. I don't know, right? But they definitely don't need to learn how to use the manual car anymore, right? There's an automation part that's happening somewhere along the line. So I think just the fear that everything's happening so quickly. And I don't know if we want to use tools like regulation and stuff like that to slow that process down. We need to take that excess and try to redistribute it across those impacted. And I won't use the word tax, because that's how we used it already. But there's ways to do that, and there has to be creative ways to do that going forward, right? We've had projects here about universal basic income, about those impacted, right? Whether it's the right word, whether it's the right structure, I don't know. What I do know is that even just the social benefits, at least in Ontario, if you look at them, all of them that have been created, they've been created as for different reasons at different times. You have Ontario Works, you have ODSP, you have everything else, and they all play different factors, but there's still people left behind, even in all those social programs, because they were built at different times during different economic downturns or upturns, whatever it was. But no one sat back and said, hey, hold up, let's pause for a minute, do we need all that? Can we replace that with UBI, for example, or something else, right? And so that's more on the policy side that, as an investor, I don't really focus too much on, because at the end of the day, for us, it's about finding the companies that are going to, have their products in the market and have buyers at the market to pay for those products, right? And if they're working on the productivity part, that's great. But there has to be other levers in the system on a systems-wide basis that needs to push that a little bit differently, right? Whether it's Bill Gates talked about robot tax, right? If you're going to replace everyone in your workforce with robots, there's still going to be a tax involved on that, whether you buy robots or whether you use them. And it goes back to developing AI in Canada or using AI for our services. And it's the use of it where you can actually apply some sort of, okay, well, we're going to share that benefit with those that were impacted. How you do that is like the biggest question that I don't think even AI can solve. So.
And I think it's the pace of change that has made it harder for us to adapt and do these just transitions as a society. Like was only how long ago that ChatGPT came out, and suddenly it's like, whoa, like it just keeps, things are accelerating really fast, and everybody's asking these questions. And if we look throughout since the Industrial Revolution, the big changes that have been happening, the gaps between them have been shrinking. And as they shrink, it just becomes harder and harder as a society to figure out how to transition people into different industries and different jobs. So it's not an answer to your question, it's more of an explanation of the problem and why it's so difficult to solve.
And on the pace, just one last thing, I'm not advocating for like speeding things up or slowing things down, but it is a balancing act, right, between this like pace of innovation and regulation and the risk of like overcorrecting, because we do need to maintain competition, right, as a country and as developers of technology, but also, and I don't need to remind anybody in this room of this, but like this panel is about eco-innovation, and we're talking about climate, and like the clock is ticking. And so there is kind of like that overhang that we need to contend with when we talk about some of these risks.
Keegan, is competition the thing that you think is going to encourage deployment more than anything else, or are there other things that we can do to, take these very promising technologies and actually put them into use?
I think competition definitely will be, not necessarily at the development stage, but as kind of like more mature businesses look for edges over their competitors, especially in mature markets where we're kind of like seeing price competition and this sort of like a race to the bottom. If AI can provide you with an edge over your competitor, you're going to give it a shot. You're going to try it. That's how this thing works. And so they're going to look to innovative companies that have commercialized a solution that works for them. And so I think that kind of like trickle-down effect is certainly going to spur innovation. I think to a large extent it already is and already has. And that's a good thing. One of the other things that I think we can do to kind of spur adoption of AI from more of kind of like a policy perspective and like top-down would be making data sets, like public sector data sets, more available to like researchers and academics, but also to businesses. I think it was Denmark that was kind of like leading the edge and analyzed a lot of the public sector data sets that they had, and they asked themselves like, what of this is generalized data? What of these data sets are not actually tied to any individuals? And so we can actually kind of like lift the veil on and make it public, and such that anybody can use them to train models and commercialize and profit off of them. Sure, no problem. And it actually worked really, really well for them, so much so that they actually started to look at what other areas that they could start developing data sets to then do the same thing for. So I think there's two aspects of it. Some of it certainly is kind of like this natural sort of like free market competition. The rest is sort of active things that we can do from a policy perspective to remove barriers and remove friction.
Awesome.
I think on the competition side, just on that, not the policy part, I think competition when others are using AI effectively, they're growing their margin, they're growing their profitability at the end of the day, right? And others on the outside who are saying, well, I'm not going to use it because of whatever reasons for now, or I haven't been brought up to speed on it, and I'm going to be wiped out. They're going to want to, because there's just so much margin now at play that your margin is my opportunity, is that whole saying, right? Like if there's a lot of margin at play, I'm going to come in and use that same technology to basically be profitable equally. Otherwise, it's just going to go towards that one person, that one company, right? It's just the way that the sort of the capitalist system works. And there has to be other factors around it that sort of move the needle different ways.
Tyler, does that hold for non-AI clean tech? Were there different levers that you're looking at?
I think it holds for everything. Like my biggest concern, like Mars looks at through the lens of like how do we support Canadian innovation, right? So when I think about how do we get it to market faster, I think about how do we get it to Canadian innovation to market faster, because let's face it, like it's going to take a lot of capital to get some of these companies out the door, and based on our research, Canadian companies get funded half as much, sometimes a third as much as U.S. companies that are kind of comparable to each other. So we automatically operate with a little bit of one hand tied behind our backs in terms of the kind of capital that we need to scale and accelerate the development of some of these solutions. And those companies either develop those products and services in Canada and create jobs that go with it, or they go to where the capital is and they move their shop to the US or somewhere else. So we talk about just transition in that, but it's also we need to be concerned about where jobs are flowing just generally, right, outside of Canada to other jurisdictions because we're not providing the proper supports.
Thank you all. I think we may have time for one final audience question if there is one. Yes?
I'd like to ask a question about should governments actually use AI to make policy changes that would drive eco-innovation and efficiency? For example, today in Ontario, solar build-outs are built based on consumption, where you could actually change some of the policy that could enable these people that are building these solar build-outs to actually build using geospatial data like treetop covers and other weather data to build more of an efficient maximum amount of solar that you can build versus building just what you need. So do you think that governments actually should use AI to drive changes to policy?
I'll give one example of, when I'm looking at just one of my parts where I focus on is the electricity grid and everything. A lot of companies have amazing software. They're using AI and whatnot to figure out how to manage peak demand, do peak shaving and everything. They're selling to utility companies. Utilities in Canada mostly are publicly owned or at least some form of public. Yet, we can't get those solutions embedded into those utility companies. Just the way the structures, just the way everything works in rate regulation. And yeah, in Ontario, ISO and so on and so forth, they all do it. They all have their own models internally, but they're not leveraging, I haven't seen them leverage anything external that what startups are working on, right? So a lot of these companies end up building to solve these problems that governments can use, I think. I think the issue becomes is it being adopted, right? Is there a way to get them into the hands of people that can actually use that data, right? I think Canada actually has it's called the Innovation Solutions Program, which basically allocates a certain amount of money where you can get pre-approved as a startup, and that other agencies can then use your tool without going through a proper RFP process, right? It's just the requirements of public procurement. The tool is there, the policy is there, but there hasn't been a lot of, it was an article in the news before a few months back, there just hasn't been usage of those funds, right, at the agency level. And is there a mismatch between those that are creating these policies to push forward this innovation within government, but whether that's actually being used or not, and the effects of that, it becomes, you put the policy in place, but you have no way to go back and measure the impact. So just to your point, I think I think government should be using it. Why not? It's another aspect in the market. It's another player in the market, but is it whether it's using it effectively or not, and giving the opportunities for some of the Canadian companies that are building these solutions in these regulated markets, right? I mean, healthcare is another example, right? I mean, we had, we talked about healthcare data and how private it is and everything else, but we had companies like LifeLab who had a breach and then we all got $7, everyone got $7 a piece. That's what our data is worth at that point, right? Can something like blockchain solve that? Can you give a wallet to yourself where it's only accessible to you, and you open that up and that's where your health data is stored? It's decentralized to you versus being centralized at a company like LifeLabs, right? But how do you drive that from the government's perspective? They have to push that forward and pilot that internally. But it's a risk, right? At the end of the day, I think there's a shift. I worked in government before. There's always the fact that we always talk about the failures of government, but never the successes. We don't celebrate that. And I think that has to change for us to really allow, bureaucrats to take that advantage of other tools that are available in the market. Otherwise, they're going to be always about minimizing risk, not maximizing, the output.
Would either of you like to add anything?
I think yes, and totally agree. And I'm generally, I think, in favor of data-driven policy as a whole. You touched on though, there's a couple knock-on effects that we need to be aware of, and I think that's a really good example. So 100%, it would be great to be using AI to determine like where to put renewable energy assets. We need to be careful about things that pop up, such as like over-reliance then on the AI model. Like how are we making sure that we're not solely relying on the model to make the decisions for us? How often is the model being updated? For example, is it only doing, and what kind of like inputs are going into the model to help drive the decisions? Is it only based on factor X, which might have like an unknown correlation to a socioeconomic factor, and so we're accidentally providing greater technology and better technology and maybe even cost savings to communities that don't need it, and we're ignoring communities that do, as an example. There are things like that I think we need to look out for, and there are kind of like natural biases that we obviously need to avoid. I think when people talk about like biases in AI, a lot of it has to do with the fact that people just, in this application specifically, like people turn over. So if there's a person making that decision, it's a new person in the job every few years. Generationally, we turn over obviously every few years. Technology doesn't necessarily work that way, and so if we park an AI model that we don't necessarily update in a decision support role, and we rely on it for sometimes several decades at a time. Video codecs is an example. That's technology we've iterated on, but is like day one stuff that is largely unchanged for like, and has been for decades. We just run the risk of kind of a lot of these like knock-on ethical effects that we just need to be aware of. So yes, I'm totally in favor of it, with specific checks and balances that are just going to naturally have to come with implementing technology like this.
Assuming I understand the question correctly, and I can't see you, I said if I'm not looking at you, these lights are blinding. But like, there's two areas where, great examples where I think using AI tools and the data that's already held by government could really help us shape policies that would benefit us from like a climate perspective, because again, that's the lens that I approach things through. So geothermal energy, and there's an emerging thing called natural hydrogen or white hydrogen or geologic hydrogen. It's pretty cool. It's like we suddenly realize there's hydrogen under the ground and we just need to tap it, and it's emission-free when we use it as a fuel. And there's now kind of like a gold rush out there trying to find where it is in the world. The Geological Survey of Canada and any equivalent body in other countries has tons of data that they've collected from drilling sample wells and boreholes for the oil and gas industry. So the whole like Western Canada is dotted with these things. They've got the data, it's in the databases. Applying that to some tool that could help us to do predictions, generally accurate predictions of where the best geothermal resources are or where there's more likely to be pockets of natural hydrogen, could be used to inform policy and to direct resources towards the exploration, a more efficient exploration, because that's one of the things that's held it back in Canada. Geothermal industry hasn't taken off because it's so expensive. You just keep drilling holes, and what's the temperature there? Okay, that didn't hit it. Let's drill a hole here, and it's very capital intensive. So if we can reduce that capital intensity using the data that we have, it could really help to spur new markets and industries in Canada.
Awesome. Okay, folks, well, we've come up to the end of our time. I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking our panelists for their insight and sharing their experiences. And thanks to all of you for being a great audience.
A big thank you to Alison and our panel for such an enlightening discussion on the power of AI and emerging technologies for eco-innovation. This panel and other discussions today have been helpful for me to better understand the role of AI when tackling grand challenges.
It's hard to believe, but this brings us to the end of our panels and speakers. We have one more set of breakout workshops following the break for the in-person audience. We will combine the two breakout sessions today, so we will be having conversations about AI in cities as well as eco-innovation in the courtyard outside. And the session will commence at 2:45 p.m., directly following the short break with refreshments available in the foyer.
For our online audience, thank you for being with us virtually. We appreciate your attendance and participation. It's been an exciting 2 days, and I know that I'm walking away from Together Ensemble Conference with a renewed sense of purpose as I engage with topics related to the SDGs in my own research. I'm also excited to see what the future holds as we mobilize emerging technologies to accelerate sustainable development outcomes.
And I can definitely agree with you on that, Leah. I am leaving this conference more motivated and deeply informed about the SDGs and excited to embark on new initiatives that will continue to contribute to their achievement. The insightful discussions, thought-provoking keynote speakers, and diverse perspectives shared during these 2 days have broadened my understanding of the challenges we face and the innovative solutions being developed. What struck me the most was the emphasis on collaboration and the recognition that no single entity can tackle the SDGs alone. It will take a concentrated efforts from governments, private sectors, civil society, academia, and individuals alike to drive meaningful change. The Together Ensemble Conference has been a powerful reminder that collective responsibility we all share in creating a more sustainable and equitable world.
Before heading off for our break, followed by the breakout workshop in the courtyard, we want to take a minute to share a big thank you to our supporters and sponsors. The Together Ensemble Conference was presented by the University of Waterloo's Economic Development Program and the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, SDSN. We are grateful to be funded by the Government of Canada and supported by the Balsillie School of International Affairs and Alliance 2030. Also, a very special thank you to our organizing partner, ESD. Your team made an important contribution to the conference by bringing together a great selection of speakers and participants. Also, a special thank you to our volunteers for generously contributing their time.
We also want to express another gratitude to our speakers, moderators, and panelists. Your contribution to the conference is greatly appreciated. We also want to thank you, our audience, for being here online and in person for the important conversation that will lead to actions as we work together to achieve the SDGs. We have about 5 years left to hit the targets and goals set out on the Agenda 2030. We recognize that there are challenges when tackling the issues of the 21st century, but we believe that we can overcome these challenges when we work together.
Indeed, that is an important takeaway from the Together Ensemble Conference. Many hands make for lighter work, and based on what I have witnessed over the past 2 days, Canada is in good hands with engaged professionals from different sectors and locations across the country. We encourage you to stay connected and engaged with the Together Ensemble community, and we hope to see you all at our next conference, and thank you for making this year's conference a success.
Refreshments are available outside of the auditorium for our in-person audience. And a reminder that volunteers and staff are wearing a green lanyard if you need anyone to assist you with anything. And that there's also a drop-off of lanyard on the recycling right outside by the entrance if you do not wish to take your lanyard home as a souvenir, as Leah said earlier. Enjoy the breakout workshops and have a safe trip home, and thank you again so much for participating in such a meaningful conference.